The Marine Corps requires leaders of all ranks to have a deep understanding of war and the employment of force. MCDP 1 reminds Marines that the military profession is a thinking profession. Every Marine is expected to be a student of the art and science of war. It goes on to say that every Marine has an individual responsibility to study the profession of arms. Self directed study in the art and science of war is at least equal in importance to maintaining physical condition and should receive at least equal time. The Marine Corps Association understands the critical importance of ensuring that Marines are as mentally ready for combat as they are physically ready. That is why we offer an entire page dedicated to wargaming on our website. We have recommendations for both tabletop board games as well as computer games. And for Marine Corps Association members, there is a discount code for War Game Design Studios that you can find on the website. War games are a great way to immerse yourself in history and to put yourself in the shoes of the great leaders of history. Go beyond guided instruction and experience the thrill of wargaming. Check us out at mca-marines.org/decision-making-exercises/wargaming-2. That's mca-marines.org/decision-making-exercises/wargaming-2. Take your training to the next level. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Welcome to episode 214. This week, we bring you the penultimate episode of our Road to 250 segment, celebrating the Marine Corps' 250th birthday in 2025. Throughout the rest of the year, we'll continue featuring stories and history from throughout the 250 years of the Marine Corps. These episodes are nested within the MCA's overall Road to 250 campaign, where we have featured articles in both the Gazette and Leatherneck, highlighting events and battles within specific periods in Marine Corps history. The MCA also has a commemorative Road to 250 coin collection. These commemorative challenge coins can only be found through the MCA. Go to marineshop.net to order individual coins or email customer service at mca-marines.org to order the entire set or learn more. This month, we walked the Road to 250 during the global war on terror era of Marine Corps history. Walking it with us is Lieutenant Colonel Michael Wersch, USMC retired, an artillery officer turned Harrier pilot who eventually flew F-35s before retiring. Michael shares his experiences as an artillery forward observer during Operation Phantom Fury and a Harrier pilot during Operation Odyssey Dawn, the air campaign in Libya during the Arab Spring. As a member of multiple MEUs, his participation during the Long War spans the land, sea, and air, and we're excited to engage with his unique perspective on the decades-long war across multiple theaters. This is episode 214. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, thank you for joining us and your continued support. I'm Vic. I'm here with William.
Howdy, y'all.
And we're really excited to be welcoming Michael Wersch to the show. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so Michael is a former artillery officer who Judased it up and went over to the fucking wing side of the house and then flew F-35s in the Marine Corps. So we're really excited for having you on. For our listeners who've been keeping track, this is the second to last installment of our Road to 250 series, where we've been following Marine Corps history through the various eras of the 250 years of the Marine Corps. And this bucket, as we refer to it as, covers the GWAT or the GWAT, because it sounds like guac, era of the Marine Corps. And rather than just diving into Iraq and Afghanistan, which no shade there, being a vet of both those campaigns myself, there was so much else going on in Marine Corps at that time, and one of them being Arab Spring. And for those who don't remember, or maybe were too young to even have it register, was a time when many of the Arab nations sort of rose up. There was a groundswell to unseat a lot of the authoritarian regimes in the region. One of them primarily being Libya under Omar Gaddafi. And Michael, you flew missions in support of that, which was dubbed Operation Odyssey Dawn. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, awesome. And so we're going to dive into a little bit about what Arab Spring was. Many may remember the 13 hours, the book 13 hours, and went into a really great movie that highlighted the stuff that was going on in Benghazi, which happened, really right after the Arab Spring time. But we're all sort of in that era right now. So really excited because the implications of Odyssey Dawn and stuff that happened in Benghazi really changed sort of the landscape of not only how Marines respond to crises, but what our force laydown was in the region, and all these things, and the way we partnered with our regional allies. So yeah, looking forward to this. So before we dive into what you did in support of OD, let's talk a little bit about you, Michael. Was the Marine Corps always something on your mind, or was it like, I don't want to be a substitute history teacher. Let me figure out what I'm going to do with my life.
No, I think, it was funny looking back, as a kid, I would read, military books and history books, about the Pacific campaign and, I mean, obviously not a high level, but it was something that always interested me, played G.I. Joe as a kid and,
Yes.
but, I went off to college and, at that time I didn't really look too much into ROTC, didn't really think too much about it. And it wasn't until I was getting ready to graduate my bonus senior year that I really started looking at the different branches of the military. And, unfortunately, I'd say just a lot of the other services, they were very active on campus with recruiting, whether it was for ROTC or OCS or OCC. And, the Marine Corps was actually the last branch that I bumped into rolling through the student union one day on my way to business law class and saw a gunny standing there with all these cool posters. And, I said, man, what's that all about? These Marines are, climbing in the mud and, doing all sorts of stuff. I said, what's that all about? And he said, well, if you get through training, then those are the things that you can do. And that was, the fact that he actually challenged me, like, hey, if you can do this, these are the things that you can do. Not knocking the other branches, but it was, hey, if you want to sign up, sign here, and you'll be off to the races. But yeah, kind of a non-standard approach to it, but yeah, that's how it happened.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's such a that theme resonates with me, and we hear it a lot from our guests. But this idea that the Marine Corps is going to challenge you right off the bat, rather than start offering you stuff and telling you what the Marine Corps can do for you. There's so much of that, like, well, if you can make it, or we talked a little bit before we started recording about Ty Bardo and sort of us coming up, and it was sort of the same thing. I was looking at other services and, all these SEAL guarantees or, Ranger school or college money or whatever. And then I went to the OSO because Ty was already in. He's like, yeah, just talk to him. So I get there, the guy's like, well, I don't know if I could get you in actually because we're kind of full up for this next class. And if you want to put in a package, that'd be great. But I'm not. I don't know when we could get you in. And I was like, oh,
Sure.
really, motherfucker?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
let's play. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's really funny.
about what year were you in college and graduating when you were looking at the Marine Corps?
I was on a little over 4.5 year college program. So I was supposed to graduate in, I think, 2000, but I miscalculated a few things and wanted to repeat a few classes because they were so much fun. So I ended up, finishing up around, it was supposed to be, winter of 2001. I had to take one last class into January, but it was, yeah, 2001. So, um,
So, what was your experience around September 11th, and then how did that influence, your future involvement in the Marine Corps? Like, were you understanding what you? No, obviously, no one really knows what you're getting into, but would you view yourself as wanting to become an active participant in the beginning of GWAT?
oh yeah, well, and it's funny you mentioned that too, because I thought about that recently. So I started expressing interest in the Marine Corps. in that senior year, and I was waiting on a waiver and, kind of just working a part-time job, doing, doing some government contracting, but in College Park, Maryland. So not too far from DC. And I remember that, on September 11th, a buddy of mine hit me up on AOL Instant Messenger and said, "Hey man, a plane just hit the World Trade Center." I said, "Wow, that's crazy." Like everybody else thought it was a, Cessna. And then, another half hour later saying, "Hey, another plane hit." So, and then not too long later, a plane, hit the Pentagon. And from the top of my office building in College Park, Maryland, you could see the smoke coming up from the Pentagon. And so my mom and I, we drove, she was working on the University of Maryland campus. And I remember everyone left early. There was one retired Marine colonel who came into me and he knew I was waiting to go to the Marine Corps. And he just said, "Hey man, you're going to war." But at that time, you didn't really think too much about it. But, my mom and I were driving back to our house in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And I remember seeing, CH-53s and other, transport assets up and down 355 and, 270 bringing DVs to various locations throughout the National Capital Region, and it was just surreal, And then 2 nights later, my buddies and I, we drove around DC, and I remember it's just wild. The White House is completely blacked out, the Washington Monument, all of the Lincoln Memorial, all of the monuments, all of the major structures were completely blacked out with, not the normal Secret Service, but like SWAT team, like blacked out, assault rifles. It was pretty wild.
And what are some of your thoughts? I mean, growing up in the area, obviously large military presence, and I guess sort of almost tangentially, you're just gonna pull in a lot more. National security stuff's gonna resonate more because it's just kind of the part of the fabric of this area. What was that when you hear of a veteran, Marine in particular, says, "Hey, you're going to war," like, what is that? What did that do for you?
I mean, I was 22 or 23 years old at the time, and I think like, most young males that, like that just got, my blood was just flowing. I mean, it's like you just got called up for the Super Bowl. So
Yeah.
knowing that, that was happening at that time in our lives. And, back then, people were, you drive around the Beltway, and that's when Americans were waving American flags on the top of overpasses. And, it was so patriotic. And, knowing that I was going to get to, I guess have, at least participate. I didn't know, like, hey, at the time I thought Afghanistan was going to be a, 2 to 3 month campaign and go in and, turn it into a piece of glass and then we'd be done with it. We were a lot of my buddies in OCS, we were worried that we wouldn't, quote unquote, see any action. And, we couldn't have been more wrong on that, obviously. But, just growing up in the DC area, it was surreal. It was exciting. It was just a really cool time. I would say cool. Obviously, war is
Yeah.
it's horrible looking back, but when you don't know any better, when you're a young male full of, piss and testosterone, when they're like, "Hey, dude, you're gonna go fight the bad guys," it's like, "All right, dude, let's do this." So
Nice. And then so you hadn't gone to TBS yet, is that right at that point?
no, no, so I didn't go class up. So my class was the first class. So there was one class that happened in October of 2001. It was the first class to class up after 9/11. I was the one after that, and it was the first class that had people that signed up after 9/11. So that was
Mm.
interesting. I remember there's one of my rack mates. He was, a stock exchange guy, downtown Manhattan when 9/11 happened, and he left that, lucrative career to be a Marine, and he's still in now. He's an '06. There's just a lot of guys and gals that were, just the highest level of patriots that signed up after the fact to go and do America's doing.
That's crazy. Yeah, I actually in OIF one, our motor T officer was that same thing. He was New York, Manhattan, true and true, was working finance somewhere, making, goo gobs of money.
Yeah,
And then 9/11 happened, and then he joined up, and they say he's a fucking motor T officer.
yeah.
Oh, it's hilarious. So you obviously you go in a ground contract. We'll talk a little bit about your motivation to jump ship, but what did that mean for you? I mean, was IOC something on the table? Was Artie always kind of, yeah, like you
No,
always want to be a cannon
no.
cocker?
Absolutely. No, I mean, I'm not knocking, I had a great time in artillery and I had a very fortunate tour. We got to do some amazing things, during my short time in the Arty program. But at TBS, all I wanted to do was be a grunt. It's all I could picture myself. And the day that the selection came out, initially it was logistics, but there was a shuffle. I think somebody got sent to Mike Company, and they needed to fill a role at Arty School. So, I think I might have upset my, SPC and company commander because I was, not very grateful for, the MOS that I was given. A lot of guys that did go to Arty School with, they were kind of in the same boat, because, OIF 1 happened while we were at artillery school. So all of our buddies that went to IOC, they were platoon commanders in a massive invasion. And here we are, practicing call for fire on a hilltop in, Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that was a little bit of my reason for wanting to leave artillery later on. I think I just felt like I wanted to be a little bit closer. And but yeah, ultimately, what did it, fast forwarding to in the fleet, I think there was I think it was General Latonsky at the time said, artillery batteries will not become provisional MP companies, and they did. And I had already been selected to flight school, but that kind of just sealed the deal. The guys were starting to go and deploy and left their howitzers at home, and instead of calling for fire and fire for effect on the bad guy, it was garden bases, and it just seemed a logical time. I mean, I had a ton of fun on that MEU with Ty. Our Marines, the battery that we brought with us, they absolutely crushed it. That was the first time I got to call in, danger close, immediate suppression. I got to call for fire in an urban environment during Phantom Fury in Fallujah Part 2. And, I was forever grateful for my artillery time. But, looking back to when I was a second lieutenant, they first gave it to me. I was, all I wanted to do was be a grunt. Looking back, I'm happy now because my knees probably couldn't handle it. But yeah, it's kind of how that
What
panned
was
out.
that? What was that? Was that was OIF 3 or
No,
2?
I have two. That was OIF
Okay.
two.
You guys came off the MEU to support Phantom Fury?
No, so we originally
No.
got pulled off the MEU to support Najaf, and that's
Okay.
kind of that's really one of the most unspoken battles
Yeah.
that ever happened. I mean, I'm sure you are familiar with it, but it got very little coverage over the years. Recently there's been some more coverage, but that was a pretty intense battle in the largest cemetery in the world, and it was against what was his name? Muqtada al-Sadr. It was
Solder,
his
yeah.
the Mahdi militia. It was against those guys in the cemetery, and there were a few times where I'm like, well, this is it. Like kind of light flashes before your eyes when we're getting in our AAVs and Humvees and bum rushing downtown Najaf to go against these dudes that are in place for a while. But yeah, started off in Najaf. We moved at some point up to we went to they were getting ready for Phantom Fury, so they backfilled. They took 3-1 out of security at Abu Ghraib and brought them over to I think Camp Fallujah. And when I got up there, so my whole company went to Abu Ghraib. We were staying in the political prisoner section. Officers were lucky enough we had solitary confinement. It was kind of an eerie spot, but one of the Marines came in one day and said, hey sir, do you know Lieutenant Johansson? I said, yeah, I know him. He goes, well, he's on Merc Chat, the SIPR
Right.
chat. And he said, well, so I went in there and he said, hey, dude, we're looking for forward observers and facts for Fallujah. Can you participate? And it was kind of back and forth between my company commander and I over the next couple of days. And he said, you sure you want to do this? I said, well, yeah, because if we don't, then there's going to be no one there to do. That's going to go like kind of an unfilled billet. So myself and my scout, French, that was his name. I think I can't remember if he was a Lance Corporal or Corporal at the time. And then Gonzalez, Lance Corporal Gonzalez, we went over there with our FAC from the MEU. So now we fell under 3-1. And that was
Okay.
probably, I think it was right around my birthday or a couple of days before that. So early November of 2004, went
Okay.
out to Camp Fallujah, linked up with them.
Oh, awesome. And then so Phantom Fury happens. Had you put in your flight package yet, or was that
No,
already in
actually,
the
I put
work?
it in when I got back from it. I remember
Okay.
because I mean, they said, hey, you're going to be there for just 2 to 3 days. So bring 2 to 3 days of provisions. So I have my radio and one pair of socks in my assault pack. I did not have my, big Molly pack or whatever it was at the time. But yeah, we ended up being there for about 2.5, 3 weeks. No razor, no nothing. So we kind of survived on same underwear, same camis, same t-shirt. I would rotate my socks out. But yeah, so I got back and it was getting towards Thanksgiving. And I remember I was back in I think so we were back in Abu Ghraib, and I remember seeing it was a MART admin for flight school. And I said, hey, this is what I wanted to do. And I emailed the monitor and I said, hey, I missed the deadline. Or maybe I said, hey, I'm going to do the best I can. I said, I was in Fallujah. So he said, just get your stuff in. And I did. And, but it wasn't until like literally the day we were flying out of Kuwait on, I think, February 6th that I found out that I got selected for flight school.
Okay. And was that immediate, or were you in the fleet for a little while, sort of marking time?
Um, I was kind of marking time, so they pulled me out of the out of the FDC, so like the Fort Observers, and they
Mhm.
put me in the battery. So I was the battery XO and guns platoon commander for a little while. And then so I didn't actually go to flight school. So I got back in February, and I didn't go to flight school until I think like November 1st is when I
Oh, wow.
PCS. So
Okay.
I had a little while.
So you're
I
just
can there was a program called IFS, Introductory Flight School, where you're supposed to do it in Quantico or down in Pensacola, where you fly like 25 hours in a Cessna. I talked to Pensacola and I convinced my battalion commander to let me do that in Carlsbad, California. So it
nice.
was pretty great. It was unfunded TAD, so I would just go fly, and if the weather was bad, I'd go surf, and otherwise it was like pretty much about two to
Yeah.
3 months, 2 to 3 months off, just completely dicking around.
Yeah,
So
Carl's had some tough duty, man.
I know, man. As a young dude with living with some roommates that were also young and single, we had a good time surfing and hitting gas lamp up before San Diego turned all crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what was flight school like then? Was it kind of a culture shock, or was it exactly what you signed up for?
It was it was definitely a little bit of a culture shock going from a ground combat arms unit who had just seen combat. That was a little challenging. And I think there was also a lot of stuff going on in my head that I hadn't really addressed yet, and God forbid
Yeah.
you be the pilot that said, hey, saw some things and I want to talk about it. So a lot of that was suppressed. Um, I had some great friends in flight school. I bought a sailboat. We'd go out to Pensacola Beach on the weekends on the sailboat. And, if we weren't flying, we'd go do that. And otherwise, flight school it was stressful, but it was chill. Um,
You had to
you
be
could
the
see.
grand old man at that thing too, right? Because those are all a lot of kids are right out of TBS, huh?
Yeah, there were some kids that I would say kids. I mean, young men and women that were fresh out of TBS or the Naval Academy if they were in the Navy and not flying. But it was a little interesting. I had to and I was like, of course, like the class leader or whatever. And I think I probably was bringing some of that ground combat mentality to flight school. And I think it was it took them a little bit, the other students a little bit of getting used to, and I had to tone down a
Yeah.
little bit. But it's all good.
Awesome. And so the platform you come out with Harrier right out the bat?
Well, yeah, just like me wanting infantry and I got artillery, I was gung ho. I'm like, hey, dude, I'm going back to
18s.
Miramar. I'm going to fly F-18s, or
Yeah.
if not, I'm going to go to Buford. If not, I'm going to go to Iwakuni. So I think I had all of those listed first. And, at the time, if you weren't number one in your class, and you had, the assumption is you had Harrier grades, like number one in your class always got, whatever their pick was. And that was Tony Cole. Anthony Cole got the Hornet slot. And everybody else, if you had Harrier grades, you're going Harriers. And then, they kind of trickled down from there. Guys were trying to avoid the Prowler slot at the time. But yeah, so I got Harriers East. That was another time where I was very upset at the time. But looking back, it was everything worked out, but a
And
little
then
bit.
oh,
I was
sorry,
gonna
go
say,
ahead.
it's San Diego and New Bern, North Carolina are, a little bit different in terms of the activities and nightlife and recreational activities. So,
Sure.
that too took some adjusting.
Did you get much stick time on the Harrier, or did you guys were they already starting to field the F-35?
No, well, so I was there. Let's see, I got there in 2007, I think, maybe like fall, winter of '07 for flight school at VMFAT 203. I got out to the fleet, I think, a year later in like late '08. I through all my, I think about 4 years maybe total, but I got just shy of 500 hours, so I never quite hit that threshold. But it was an interesting time because as they were saying, the F-35 was starting to happen, and starting to come alive. They were, depending on who your boss was, where you were stationed, whatever it was, there was mixed support for it. And sidebar, me being on the MU was really one of the only reasons that allowed me to go to the F-35. But there were some squadron COs and XOs that, if you even said the word F-35 or expressed interest in putting in a transition package, you would be benched from flying. You would get sent to the mag. It was a touchy time because a lot of guys, it was almost like, the guys at the O Club would kind of look around and whisper, "Hey man, do you put in a package?" It's like, I don't know, dude. It's a dice roll because if I say I want to do it, now I'm going to be put in the penalty box or kicked off the cool kid club. So um,
Well, that's such
yeah.
an interesting dynamic, coming from the ground side, and I think, at the time when it was fielding, I might have been at, CD&I, but there was always, I guess, this sort of assumption on the outside that the F-35 is gonna be widely embraced, but you're saying there was a cadre of
Oh, dude, it's
old
like
school.
anything else in this world, man. There's so much, so much politics in there and, tribalism going on. But it was one of those, it was just an interesting time. And
Yeah,
I remember what, so let's see, I applied for it. I started getting the package together when I was on the MU. My dead OIC, Lieutenant Colonel Hermley, Junk Hermley, was very supportive. He was like, "Man, that's awesome. If I were in your shoes, I would do it." I reached out to my incoming CO, Stump Perez, retired as a colonel. But I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, sir, I'm thinking about putting in this package," and he was very supportive of it. Um, but I mean, at the time, if that would have been a different CO who was, he would, if he said no, I mean, who knows what would have gone,
yeah.
what paths my life would have taken. But they were supportive of it, and I think I put in the package probably summer of 2011, maybe. Um, I remember at the time, so we were doing an exercise out in Bogue Field, I think called Mailed Fit. No, not Mailed Fist. Maybe Mailed Fist. We were out at Bogue Field, living in tents. It was funny because it was supposed to be expeditionary. The Harriers went from Cherry Point to Bogue Field. The Hornet squadrons came up from Beaufort and fell in on the Harrier squadrons, so they were staying in hotels. But I remember General Davis, and so he was the wing CG and the MEF CG at the time. I can't remember who that was, but I was, they needed a tour of Bogue Fields. I'm driving them around, and someone said, "Hey, what's your name?" I said, "I'm, Captain Worsh." And General Davis turned around and said, "I've got your F-35 package on my desk, don't I?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, why don't you come see me next week if you have time?" So it's like, okay, well, clearly I have time. So, left the field, cleaned up, shaved, went and got my camis, went to his office, and he said, this is a dice roll. Like if this thing gets canceled and you're out of the fleet for a while and you're not getting hours, you might not really have much relevance in the fleet. He said, "Are you willing to roll the dice on the F-35 program?" I said, "Yeah, yes, sir. I think, might be a good opportunity." And that was kind of that.
Interesting.
So,
Go ahead. Go
Michael,
ahead, Wayne.
sorry, Michael. So during all this time in flight school, to what extent were you following what was going on during the GWAT conflicts? To what extent did you think that you would continue to be involved? And then once you graduate flight school, what did the Marine Corps do with you?
I mean, I would follow a little bit, like, obviously I still had buddies in the fleet, this was before, chat groups really existed. So, there wasn't a whole lot of following in that manner, but, but a buddy of mine, Scott Cuomo, he's still in the Marine Corps to this day. He would write some Gazette articles. I would read those. And, I'd talk to my buddies on the phone and they were still hooking and jabbing and going out for their third and fourth deployment. So, I followed it. And obviously at the time, you just watching the news, you'd kind of see everything that was going on, about pulling out of Iraq and, the resurgence and, plussing up 6,000 and drawing down again. So it was kind of interesting. Being in flight school, I never really knew what it was going to look like because I mean, it changed so frequently real time that, broadcast, when I wanted jets, that's a 3-year commitment before, or not commitment, but 3 years before you ever see the fleet again. So, from the time I left flight school for when the time I left Camp Pendleton for flight school, it was basically 3 years almost to the day that I checked back into the fleet. Going through Pensacola and Meridian, and then going through the FRS in on the Harrier. It's about 3 years. So that changed a lot. The posture changed a lot. I think we had maybe like did we have a presidential election somewhere? I can't even remember, but it was, I followed it, but not, you know, just kind of, I was a voyeur, I guess, if you will.
And then, so while you're with the fleet, then you got all this sort of, um, the little bit of uncertainty and whatnot. When do you find out that you're going to be jumping on the Mew? And then were you following sort of Arab Spring and what all was going on in the region?
Well, so I got to the fleet, and about a year, not even a year into it, I got pushed. I was in VMA 542 for a little bit. I went over to VMA 231 when they were going to be bringing more jets to Afghanistan. So I went out to 29 Palms. I think it was Mojave Viper or Enhanced Mojave Viper at the time. So that was
Yeah.
August of 2009. So they didn't need us. I think they brought whatever, I can't remember if they're going to bring 12 or 14, but they only brought 10 or 8 or whatever it was, but they didn't need me. So I went back to 542. So that was fall of 2009. And then soon after that, they said, "Hey, you're going to be on the Mew." So we started those workups, and I wasn't really, I was a captain. I didn't really follow like the Arab Spring a whole lot.
Mm,
Again, anything outside the news, but we were obviously watching what was happening in the world, but I wasn't picking up books about
right.
the Arab Spring and Middle East conflicts. But
But so were you already slated for a Mew, or like how did that all play out?
um, I mean, really, it was the squadron was going to split. We had guys going on the 31st Mew, and then we had then we had a Mudet going out, and I can't remember if I asked to be on it. I really have no idea, but I just ended up being on the what was it, the 26th Mu, and not the 31st Mu. So we kind of carved out. It was a little bit weird because we had our um we had the contingent of the Mudet was in Cherry Point. The Ace was down in New River. So we kind of had our Mudet, but we'd go down there and do stuff with them, some meetings from time to time. But meanwhile, like the 31st Mu, so the Squadron CO and the XO, we were all living in the same hangar. So it was, a little bit, I would say weird, but it's just kind of an interesting organizational, when we're answering to one boss, like living with one boss, but answering
Yeah.
to another boss down in New River and all that. But yeah, so that was again, that was like spring of 2010 when we were doing all those, workups and
Yeah.
training and everything.
And so 26 Mew, so you're going into at least the med.
Hmm.
Did sort of the political stuff in the region start to become more, I guess, tactile, or was leadership telling you guys, giving you sort of, I don't know, warning orders, or at least a heads up that like, hey, here's some of the things we're going to be,
Yeah.
potentially running into?
Yeah, we were watching the previous MUDET. They were doing a lot of strikes into I'm drawing a blank right now, Syria.
Okay.
I don't, yeah, it was Copper Dune was what it was called back then. I'm pretty sure that's not classified at this point, but Copper Dune was the name of it. They were just launching off the Mew. The Mew kind of had to, it was like time sensitive targeting. So, the Mew posture had to be very different in terms of flight deck availability. So that was one of the reasons we weren't, primarily engaged in that. But, when I was on the Mew, but yeah, I mean, we were paying attention, and guys were seeing all the Miz reps, and it looked really cool. And we're like, sweet, we're gonna go get some. And um, we actually left a month early. So whatever the third period at sea period, I don't know if it's like Com2X or CertX or whatever it was called at the time. They
Right.
changing it quite a bit, but the third Mu period we never did because there was some real bad flooding in Pakistan. So
Oh yeah.
they packed up all the CH-53s, I think, in the back of C5s, and they sent the shitters forward, but the Muse still left early to see if we could go help out with anything, like throwing MREs at people or water bottles or something like that. But we got out there. I think things had kind of wound down by the time we got there. So I think we, got the 53s back on board, and then started our transit east, and then through the Suez Canal and down the Red Sea.
And then when then did you know, like, oh shit, there's a named operation that we're like.
Oh, dude, this was so like all right, this was a 9 month Mu. We had 3 port calls. It
Wait, so wait,
was
you're on ship for 9 months and only stopped 3 times?
yeah, yeah. And one of them was base only. Like they wouldn't let, and that was right before Odyssey Dawn. They wouldn't let us leave the base. And looking back, if I were a leader at the time of, a MUCO or higher, I would probably be like, that was a great decision because, I think we drank every single beer and, threw up on every single square inch of the ship when they got us back on board. But, yeah, so we went to, well, that was fast forward. That was, down the road for Odyssey Dawn. But yeah, so we went through the Red Sea. We were doing some operation, we did just some random flying wherever we could. We did a lot of work off the Horn of Africa. This was now kind of late 2010. And at one point, we kicked off a lot of the ACE into Djibouti, and we brought on some tier one assets. So we had the one,
Was JTF Hoa? It still existed back then, right?
yeah, yep.
Okay.
So we had, I think, we left the Harriers on board. We kicked off pretty much everybody else. I think we had a couple Ospreys on board for a potential trap mission, but we had the 160th came on board. We had SEAL Team 6 came on board. And that was my first time really seeing that, a actual, like, SEAL Team 6 is not the same as other SEAL teams. That was my first time seeing that with my own eyeballs. Like, those dudes are absolute freaking badasses. And yeah, so it was 160th SEAL Team 6, and then a few other agencies that, were there or maybe they weren't there. But yeah, so we did some stuff
Wait,
for a little while.
did they join you guys like via port or did they fly on like you see in the movies and shit? Like,
Yeah, they flew on, dude. Like,
yeah,
they didn't need like CQ, like carrier quals, like we
yeah,
had with graded passes. They're like, dude, fuck off, man. We're just gonna, we know what we're doing. I mean, these guys were, the 160th dudes were, if you just imagine a whole squadron full of WTIs, that was
yeah.
them. I mean, the SEAL 160th are just amazing people, and so was SEAL Team 6. So we were just like, it's almost like, you know, like fanboy stuff, watching those dudes do their thing. But yeah, so we were out there. The Harrier stayed on board in case, one of their missions went sideways. And then I think we had some Ospreys on there with our quick reaction force in case something went sideways. But, we didn't, it didn't, right? So that was time number one where we kind of stood up, got like like, oh my God, here we go. We're going to get to do something. And we didn't, we just kind of, stood back down, and 160th left and the SEAL Team 6 left. And then we brought the rest of the ACE back on. I think that was probably about December of 2010. About a month later, the Mew disaggregated, so we kind of sailed up towards the Gulf, and we got, I think, six of our 10 Ospreys disembarked. All of our Cobras disembarked. So we had left on board two or four Ospreys. I think two of which were hard down because one hit the side of a hill. And then we had the shitters. The entire BLT got off the ship. I think it was 1/8 at the time is who we had. So they got off the ship and went up there. So really, it was kind of like a shell Mew for a while, but nobody
Real
was
quick for
talking
our
about it.
listeners, the shitters are the 53s, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. The
Yeah.
CS-53s, yeah, but they're beautiful, beautiful machines.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so the CH-53s were on board, four Ospreys, one or two of which were hard down. The Harriers, um, I think that was it. It was kind of a skeleton ace. The BLT was gone, so obviously, like the chow lines were smaller, and the wardroom wasn't as packed. But besides that, we were still on the ship. Like, so we weren't drinking beers, we weren't doing anything. Somewhere in there, we pulled into Salalah, Oman, and we drank every beer at the Marriott that they had, and then they put us
Yeah,
back on the
Oman's
ship. And
amazing, man. I
yeah,
love
it was cool.
Oman.
It was cool.
So when you mean disaggregate, so you guys were down to a one ship ARG essentially? I guess not even
Uh,
ARG because you don't even have a BLT.
yeah, dude, man, I can't. One of the ships stayed up there. I can't remember who it was. It doesn't, it was whoever it was. Like one or two of the ships stayed up there. Again, I was a captain, so I'm not thinking like,
Right.
big ship movements, but yeah, so it was they all went to Afghanistan, and we're like, man, we're missing out on the big fight again. But that's right around when Egypt got overthrown. Their leader got overthrown, so we moved the boat around. We pulled out of Salalah, moved the boat around. So this is now time number 2 where we start briefing missions. What are we going to do? Where we're going to drop? What's the ROE? So again, they're getting us all kind of fluffed up for the big fight, and nothing ever happened. So
Which
yeah,
is
so that was
interesting because if you guys had already disaggregated, I mean, clearly you guys weren't in like a really a combat posture then. So you're just sort of taking it as it comes, sort of thing.
yeah, pretty much. So Spinner Boniface, Lieutenant Colonel Boniface, he was the ACO. The BLTCO obviously was in Afghanistan with his Marines. Um, and yeah, it was just a weird setup. We didn't really know tasking wise, what was going to be coming our way. We just said, we just heard, and this is around the time when I started like, reading about the Arab Spring in my stateroom, like reading what it was all about, reading what was happening. And, it definitely, the area was getting a little bit sporty. But from like still a young guy who had not yet dropped the bomb off a Harrier in anger, all I was worried about was not, like geopolitical. I was just like, hey, if I think I could freaking drop a bomb on somebody, like, this is our chance. And, we got all excited, ready to go, and then, we backed off of that. And I think that was probably like maybe January, February of 2010.
But the
But
the landscape was completely in flux then at this point. I
oh
mean,
yeah,
there's
dude.
getting, yeah.
Yeah, things were getting crazy. So, at some point, we look on the map, they have a little, the TVs in the ready room that show you where the ship is and where you're going. And, we're start seeing, hearing rumors and start seeing a map plotted out for Suda Bay. So we went all the way up to Suda Bay, and that was our second port call. So that's when we drank all the rest of the beers. We had one we had one steel beach party, and some people got so ridiculously hammered that we just never did one again. I think an officer punched another officer in the face or something crazy, nuts. But that was it. So that was our chance in Suda Bay to, drink every last beer that we could. So we did that. The BLT, I think not BLT, it was Camp Lejeune. It might have been 2-2 or 1-2 came on board. They were going to backfill the 1-8, because they were up in Afghanistan, so they backfilled them. And that was one of my first times seeing that, once you're on the ship for a long time, you kind of run the petri dish, and then everybody has all the same germs. Well, as soon as the Marines from Lejeune got there, like everybody got sick again, like all of it, at both ends. So we pushed back out, after we drank all the beers and everyone got in trouble, we pushed back out with the Marines from Lejeune. Back out in the med, and they're like, "Hey, stand by." Libya's getting crazy. But now this is the third time that they're like, "Hey, get ready." So at this point, we're like, "Sure, okay."
This is total
The boy,
what is it, the
the
crying
boy who
wolf,
cried
right?
wolf. Yeah, we're like,
Yeah.
"Okay, great, dude." Like, and I was at the time, I was like the weekly writer, training officer. So I'm just like, "Man, you guys are killing us on flight time and qualification." So we're doing the best we can to fly off the ship in the med, blue water ops, so not really a divert some of the days, and risk level, the risk tolerance was pretty low for blue water ops. But I remember one day they called us back to the ship. We were flying around, and they're like, "All right, hey, we need you guys to come back. We just gotta, come. Things are getting a little sporty." So we bring the jets back. We had 6 jets. I think we had one was like hard down, like parts weren't on the ship, was not coming back. Another one was pretty down. Parts were on and the other one was like a full engine haul. We didn't have the parts. So at the time we were kind of like 4 to 5, gusting on a good day. But I think that fifth jet wasn't coming up. But we had 4 jets. The Marines started getting them ready to go. We started getting all these briefs about Gaddafi getting a little wily in Libya. We're watching, we're listening to intel briefs in the skiff. We're listening to intel briefs in the ready room. We're watching the news at night, seeing this stuff build up. And, we actually briefed the mission, like, hey, if we do it, this is what it's going to look like, where we would go. But, at this point, I'm still like, okay, sure, this isn't going to happen, because we had done this 3 times. This is the third time now. And I remember one night, they think it was Obama was a president. So we're on the ship, kind of, I don't know what time it was, but it was like, hey, if you don't turn your forces south from Benghazi by whatever time, like that's it. That's your line in the sand. And our intel officer was like, "Hey, dude, I think it was like 9 o'clock with where we were. That was like the line in the sand." He goes, "Hey, man, once you come up to the flight deck, dude, you might miss something that's cool." So we're standing up there on the flight deck at 9 o'clock at night or whatever time it was, and next thing you know, dude, freaking T-lambs start going out from all the destroyers around us, and we're like,
Wait,
"Holy shit!"
explain T-lambs.
It's the land attack missiles,
Yeah,
the
okay.
Tomahawk land attack missiles. They go off of like either out of the destroyers, off the destroyers, or out of the subs. But they started launching TLAM attacks from these surface ships. So at that point, I'm like, dude, it's on now. Like we're not, this is not the third time that we're not going to. Granted, our role, we were briefed. We knew we were
Third
going to
time's a
probably
charm,
go.
right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, holy shit. Well, of course, I was like -4 in the 4 ship. We had 4 jets to make 4. They were loaded. And I remember when the missile started flying, I'm like talking to the Marines in the flight deck about, we're about to go do this thing. But I was supposed to be sleeping. But now I who can sleep then, dude? Freaking you got
Right.
adrenaline, like you can smell it seeping out of your pores. And so I went back to my room. I might have, I don't know how much I slept, maybe a little bit, probably not much, but we got up in the morning. I don't even know what time, maybe like a 2 o'clock brief for a 4:30 takeoff time. I think a 06 recovery. We did not have tankers at the on station yet, but yeah. So we go out to the jets. We were four to make four. We fire them up. I mean, I'm just like just pumped. I'm so excited about this thing. And I remember, being on the flight deck, all the Marines were out there. It was everybody was just like fucking fired up. And I remember, the Harrier, you couldn't hand something into the cockpit or out of the cockpit because you had, single engine, so you couldn't like shut one side down and put a plug in the other or whatever it was. But this dude, I just see this hand waving at the side of my face. I'm like, what the hell is that? So I look over and it's one of my buddies, Vince Damon. He was a Huey pilot. He's like waving something in my face. So not wanting him to get like sucked down the intake or fought by motor, I just like grabbed a piece of paper. The Marines were trying to like pull him back, but I grabbed the piece of paper and I still have it to this day. It's actually like our tasking. It had the tasking that we were doing. What was it? Yeah, the Righteous 4, 7, and 5-0. We'll found you were tasked for SCAR, so strike coordination reconnaissance. It said line 10, target any JPT priority targets, prioritizing from north to south, destroy as many targets as possible. Concentration on the western portion of the kill box along the main north-south MSR going from lat long to lat long. So, that was pretty cool to get that. I'm like, holy shit, dude, this is actual like tasking. I didn't think I'd get that. And but my jet at the time, again, we were four to make four. It had a station one failure, so we were carrying GBU 12s, the Lightning Pod, and we had AIM 9 mics on board at the time, the mighty AIM 9 mic. Well, I had a station one failure, which was basically like where the AIM 9 mic was a hard failure. So I was not allowed to launch off. So I'm like, shit, dude. I mean, we're troubleshooting. I'm like, I'm not going. Like, I just lost my chance. So I was like sitting there like, dude, this is, out of the three to make four. And, what are we going to do? And the Marines were like, hey, sir, you're in whatever, aircraft 55. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? That jet's been down for 3 weeks. They're like, you're in aircraft 55. I'm like, how's the jet up? Like, sir, you're in aircraft 55. I'm like, I won't ask, can it fly? Like, yeah, get the jet. So, jump in the jet, launch off. And that was like, the first, there was four of us that did the first strike, at least for the first Harrier strike. But it was, night one in Libya, 4:30 takeoff and, landed as sun was coming up. And it was just cool as shit, man, to like, actually get up there in a jet, be at, 25, 30,000 feet, drop a bomb on the enemy and come back to the boat and recover. And, I remember when I was hovering to land, like I was so excited about it, man. I felt like, when we landed, it was just like this, like, holy crap, dude, the freaking Harriers, like this little, the small little brother just went out there and just kicked their teeth in. It was pretty badass to be a part of that.
That's so interesting. So these are aspects of the air side that, like, I really, being a ground pounder, I just never really considered. So, like, what were your? So you get this task or basically that piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you communicating with? Like, what were your ROEs? What was PID? Like, generally with air, I've always understood that, you have a FO on site that's sort of, doing a lot of that work, or you have a JTAC that's, embedded with the unit. How did that work for you guys, being that you were in support of essentially a insurgent force within Libya? Like, who were you coordinating with, or was there any like, how did that all? What
Yeah,
was sort of
no.
the comm
Yeah.
role there?
Yeah, that's a valid question. Yeah. So, um, at the time, this thing happened so fast that there were not a lot of C2 agencies in the area that could reach back. The closest other platforms were flying, I think, from Aviano, Italy to Libya, which was, I think, about a 2.5, 3 hour flight. We were 100, 150 miles off the coast. So we were 30 minutes in country and out. Um, the beauty of the Mu and being on the ship is we had the ship's intel folks, we had the Mu intel folks. So as a pilot, we would walk into the ready room. They would give us just a eye-watering intel brief of, I mean, literally, I mean, it was actually eye-watering. I'm not saying that in a joking manner, but they would give us a brief. They showed us, satellite images of where like the daily activity was. They would tell us like the other, they wouldn't divulge how they got it, but they had, TS means on the ship of getting other information and other intel. They would say these are the active surface to air missile sites. These are the ones that have been taken out. This is where we think they have forces. Like this is where we think they have any remaining air forces. This is where we think they have, this is the current ground position. These are your targets. Like this is your min out based off of your minimum altitude based off of SAMs that are out there. So we would walk out the door every single night for however long it was, for 2.5, 3 weeks. We would go when we would step on our flights. We knew where we were going. We knew what targets we were going after. We knew the priority that we would hit them in. And it was cool too because we got into a neat rhythm of, taking. If we launched the fourth ship, like two might go to the tanker first, two might go out to the target area in the kill box and go drop bombs or at least recce the targets. Go back to the tanker if we needed to, but as soon as we slipped off the planes, we would go back to the ship. One would get bombs, one would get gas, and we had this like well-oiled machine of just death and destruction from these little Harriers. And it wasn't, we weren't carrying 8 bombs. We're carrying as a two ship, we had 3 bombs. The flight lead had a teapot on station 4 with 2 GBU-12s, 500-pound laser guided bomb, and the wingman had 1 GBU-12. But I mean, we like that little with the onboard, with the ships and the Muse intel that we had. I mean, we packed a huge punch for those few days, really, those few weeks we were doing it.
That's really fascinating. So you didn't liaise at all with anybody on the ground. It was all via the
No,
US2.
yeah. So if you're doing close air support, that's when you need, it's going to be detailed
Yeah.
integration with the ground force. Strike coordination and reconnaissance, like that armed reconnaissance is kind of inherent in that mission. You're out there and you just have your list of things that you're looking for. You'll kind of know where you should and should not drop based off of
Yeah.
the friendly and enemy picture. But there were some missions that we would go out there and it was like something out of training. It's like, you would see 4 T-72 tanks, engines on, with people climbing on top of them, getting ready to like roll into a city, and we would just start plinking them with GBU-12s. And these things, I mean, they would blow up in a manner which, we would go back to the boat, get more bombs. Then 2 hours later, you could barely drop on the one next to it because the fireball was so massive.
Yeah. Yeah. That all that secondary and all those POLs going off, man. It's
Oh,
crazy.
it's insane, man. It was insane.
Dude, that's nuts. I don't know. Before I move on to William, you got anything in regards to this?
Yeah, so you mentioned tanks. What other sort of targets were you all hitting? Like, what was your, I guess, your priority list specifically?
Um, it kind of depended. Initially it was tanks because they were getting ready to roll into Benghazi, and that was the big fear, was they were going to, like, once they were in Benghazi, there's really hard to, to pick out, do armed recce in an urban environment without, killing civilians. So we hit them hard before they pushed north into Benghazi. And then we kind of worked our way over to Misrata as well. But initially tanks, any type of armored personnel carriers that were out there. And again, they would give us general locations of like known bases for where they would store it. Um, but at first, I'd say the first week or so, week and a half, there was, we would see them active out there. We would see tanks rolling. On one night, two of our pilots, I think it was Chris Tashinsky, who is still at Headquarters Marine Corps, and then Fraggle Carlson. He's a Southwest pilot now, but they took out a Scud missile. They still argue to this day of who actually killed it and who. But so the targets, they kind of changed as we would go. But a week and a half, 2 weeks into it, we were beating their ass so bad. Not just us, obviously the rest of the joint force, that I think that they were, whatever forces that were still remaining, they knew that they weren't getting in the APCs anymore. So at that point, we were taking out targets, still the same type of targets, but prohibiting further follow-on actions from Gaddafi's forces. But by then, he was already on the run. So
Yeah. Were you guys cognizant of any effects like end state stuff? What you know, I guess what was translating between what you guys are doing at the tactical level into the operation, or were you just given like, hey, here's your list, take out everything you can, and
oh,
just let the guys back in the ship worry about the effects?
no, absolutely. I mean, now by this time, everyone is like hyper focused on why, what we were doing, why it was important. I mean, you could have gone into power line and ask the youngest lance corporal, like, what are we doing out here? And they're knowing, yeah, they know kind of what we're doing and what the impacts are. I mean, everyone's watching, Fox News and CNN. They're seeing it real time. I think we actually had CNN or one of the couple of Al Jazeera show up to the ship, and they were, watching us launch off the ship and the operations. But yeah, by then we were just hyper aware of the effects, and that's what's I think made it so much cooler was to see this, kind of is almost like the bad news bears. Like everyone loves to say, how irrelevant the MEU is, but that MEU we did everything, to include the trap mission that went down. I think on like day 3 or 4 of that. That kind of conflict period in Odyssey Dawn. But yeah, it was awesome. I mean, it was just awesome to be a part of it.
How do you juxtapose that between, say, like, Phantom Fury or your time, in Iraq, where, you'd mentioned that even the, Lance Corporal working on, turning wrenches knew exactly what it was you guys are doing, and would you say that there was more of a sense of like, we're doing the good for the people who can't, or like, I don't know, or was it the same? I'm not sure.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it was definitely different, and obviously, there for me there was a difference of 30,000 feet of altitude
Sure.
separation, and Phantom Fury. Again, I was a lieutenant, full of piss and vinegar. We're on the front lines of Fallujah. I mean, that was just chaos. I mean, there were dead people everywhere. There were dogs eating dead people in the streets.
Mhm.
I mean, it was just nuts. I mean, we lost, the Marines. We took some significant casualties, killed and wounded, with the company that I was with and other companies and battalions kind of next to us. And it was just chaos. I mean, that was just a whole different part of my life that, it's like, one day, maybe I'll tell my kids how it was, but, um, there's one of those things that truly like, changes how you view life after that. Doing the Odyssey Dawn thing, being up at 25, 30,000 feet, it was amazing because you felt, you're impacting the war. You are seeing on news like the implications of, okay, every night, man, it was an update. Like, all right, Gaddafi's forces, they've turned south. Gaddafi's forces, they've consolidated. Oh, guess what? A freaking B2 just dropped bombs all over, or B1 is, section of B1s out of Missouri just put, 50 GBU 31s or 32s on their position. I mean, you could see us winning that. You could see the tide turning. Fallujah, I mean, we just killed everything. I mean, we've just completely smoked that entire city. But I mean, it was different. It was
Yeah.
both very exciting periods in my life, obviously, and it was just really cool to be a part of both, I guess.
Yeah, what an interesting perspective from both sides of it. You'd mentioned, Air Force B2s. Did you guys have to do a lot of sort of inter-service coordination for your targeting, or were you guys your kill box was your kill box?
Self-sufficient, really. I mean, I
Okay.
think at one point we found a crap load of targets, and we were trying to pass it off to some B1s that had, 10 times as many bombs as we had, or more
Right.
than, 15 times. So we tried to pass it off to them because we're like, okay, we could spend the entire day plinking these APCs that are parked in the motor pool. But yeah, there was not really a lot, and I
Okay.
think that was just highlights again, just capabilities of the MEU. I mean, one thing that it was just so cool. We would take off from the ship. We would switch. You had to do through the standard frequencies, but you could hear other airplanes out of all of the, calling, bingo fuel, declaring emergencies, trying to find tankers, trying to get, new targeting like the MEU. We had our targeting before we took off. We got airborne. We would switch to the tanker freak, be like, hey, this is righteous, whatever. We're good. We're switching to our homies. And we would switch over to the C-130s that followed us out there from Cherry Point. They were the sumo, or not sumos, the Otis squadron out of Cherry Point, the MGR 252. Um, we had a liaison on the ship, and those guys were flying in support. They would launch two every night. So we would take off. You could see when you had the goggles on, you could see planes and tankers everywhere. We would just be down at a lower altitude because C-130s tank at a lower altitude, and we would just go join up with the tankers. We're shooting the shit with our boys on the radio. We're not we would just they're like, hey man, what are you guys going after tonight? We're like, I don't even know, dude. We go smoke these targets, and we'd go back. It was just cool. Like you're literally like working with your boys. So we'd
Yeah.
push off the tanker, go drop our bombs. If we didn't, we'd go back to the tanker and look for more. But the coordination, because the MEU we did it almost all in-house. I mean, obviously, at a higher level, they were doing coordination, but at the tactical level, like for the operators, it was beautiful because there's no confusion. Like I knew what we had to, we knew what our tasking was.
Yeah.
Whether I was a wingman or a flight lead, like it was never a question what we had to do, and it was just great.
And um, so you said that was a couple weeks. Are you guys Winchester at that point and just have to beat feet back home, or like what was the retrograde from
Well,
that?
no,
Like,
so there was one day specifically, I forgot what the date was. I think we started on March 19th. It was about 2.5, 3 weeks, but there was a date and it was a very specific time that, hey, at this time, all air to surface fires have to stop. Like there was a new, the days of arm, if you see a target, you drop on it. There was a new approval process. That time coincided because we were launching off so heavy with, ordnance and fuel, that the ship was struggling, so the ship was broken. We had to pull into port. So at that time, it was right around this, basically dropped our last bombs. I was not on that flight. I was the LSO, for, landing signals officer in the tower. We dropped the last bombs, landed, and we started pulling into port. Where the hell did we go? Italy, I think. Sigonella, maybe around there. So, but then they wanted us to maintain an alert posture because they were doing follow-on actions. So we were basically, 12 on, 12 off, standing alert around the clock with, now the jets that we had been, riding hard for a while. They were in Sigonella. I think we had like four guys to a BOQ room, like two in the bed, one on the floor and one in the bathtub, that basically just crawling with people. If you were a senior, you could share a bed with another dude. If you were a junior, you were on the floor in the bathtub. But it was crazy. So we did that for a little while. When we were on duty, we just play, Tiger Woods golf on the Xbox and hang out until they lowered the posture a little bit. But yeah, we did that for a few weeks before they let us, go out and explore Sigonella a little bit and the rest of Italy.
okay. And then from there home?
Let me think here. March, yeah, I think we kind of wrapped that up, flew back on the ship. That was probably April. Yeah, I think we stopped by Rhoda on the way home. And that was where we like, we just got, I mean, we drank everything on that entire base, I believe. But we did that. Then we stopped off at lodges. And then no, not lodge. I'm sorry, that was a different deployment. No, we went right from Rhoda back home. Yeah. So we got home, I think May. I want to say like mid-May of
Okay.
2011.
And then being that you guys are still, kind of in the MEB, even though you're out or out in the med, even though you're, full at the edge of it, was the environment, sort of the landscape of the region calming down, or were you guys still like, holy shit, are we gonna get, part four of this thing?
No, that was, I mean, once we did that, I mean, we knew the ship was had band-aids all over it. I mean, the
Okay.
ship boilers were banged up. The other MEU left early again. So the other squadron that I temp loaned to that had done Afghanistan, VMA 231, they were now out on the MEU. So we basically did a high five.
Okay.
And once they ripped into place, into the med, we knew that, I forgot what the operational term is, but we knew there was no turning back at that point. Like
Gotcha.
we had already done the high five. We had started to lose currency on our landing, so the ship could, we could get all the planes and helicopters and ospreys ready to fly off and go home.
Yeah. What, looking back on it, because Benghazi was it 13? Was and then, you're talking about, bubble gum and duct tape on your way, got you home. Um, was there any, like, not to say that anybody really looks at the ground and, is prophetic about what could happen in the future, but the lack of availability of ships to support Benghazi in 13, led to, establishing the crisis response force in, I want to say it was Italy. Um, all of the different partnerships we did because of the lack of ship availability. Did you guys have any indication as you're kind of limping home, like, hey, this is a problem that, or like I said, was it just not registering at the time?
Yeah, I mean, that was just kind of a known in the background.
Okay.
Fast forward, when I was in between my my tour in Iwakuni when Tyler was the CEO of 121, and then follow on BC Rusnak. Well, I went to the Pentagon and I worked for N98.
Oh,
I was the
nice.
kind of a Marine temp loan to the Navy, working like F-35 requirements, and it was interesting because you could see so all of the so in underneath N98, that's air warfare. All of they have the carrier division, so all of the carriers fall under N98. So they get funding from the air side. The Marine Corps side, so the Gator Navy, all like the flat bottom boats, all of your America Wasp class ships, all of your LSDs, LPDs, whatever else,
Hmm.
they all fall under N95, and that's expeditionary warfare. So very different budgeting concerns, and frankly, just at the Navy level, like you're talking big blue Navy, probably 3 and 4 star. There's a lot bigger focus on carriers and the N98 side than there is N95. N98 is a 2 star admiral, and 95 is typically a 2 star Marine general. Not to say that it's not important. I'm just think there's very different budget considerations when it comes to the Gator Navy.
Yeah, you could definitely tell what's important to them based off of who's leading those
Oh,
agencies, right?
absolutely, yeah,
Yeah,
and yeah, and again, it's just all there was required watching when you're in the Pentagon. It was called Pentagon Wars, and it was you just kind of see all the politics behind the scenes that drive all that. But
yeah,
it just
yeah.
made me
Very
really excited to go.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure.
Um, so I really appreciate you taking as much time as you have. This has been really fascinating. I think this is an aspect of the GWAT era that we just really, don't tend to really talk much about. So this has really been enlightening. What what looking back, like, if you had to, Pensacola called you in to talk to the young guys or guys and gals, or you're gonna, in a bar and you see a bunch of jarheads sitting around, like from your experiences on both sides would you have to say to this emerging generation? Is because us dinosaurs, man, we're all gone.
Yeah.
Many of the folks that we served with are either wearing way too much on their collar to necessarily be able to reach down and impart that kind of stuff. I not to belabor the point, but when we were coming up through this 20 years of war, man, you could, throw a stick and hit 10 veterans. It's just
Hmm.
information. Now, they're either up on the hill or they're retired or out, and so like what, and Sergeant Majors talked a lot about the responsibility of us veterans to be able to, continue to impart that these experiences, because it's just not in the force anymore. It's not in the fleet. What would you have to say to this current generation of Marines? Is they're sort of looking at the world and not knowing, what the hell's going to be next?
Um, it's you're I always thought, that there were, I always thought I knew where I'd be and what I'd be doing. Again, I wanted infantry, I got artillery, and I ended up seeing some incredibly crazy stuff on the ground in Iraq. I wanted Hornets, got Harriers. I got to see some incredibly crazy stuff in a Harrier. From there, I did some wild stuff in a C-130. Things just, your career is going to take all these turns. Many of them, unanticipated, not expected. But I would say like just advice would just, be prepared for everything, everything. And I think General Mattis talked about it in his retirement speech about timing. When I went to Iraq on the ground, there were guys that were way more qualified, forward observers, smarter on artillery, artillery systems, indirect fire but it was just my time. I happened to be the dude in the seat that got
The merch.
that the Merc chat for Fallujah.
Yeah.
In Najaf, we just happened to be the unit that was deployed in Najaf when it popped off. For Odyssey Dawn, we happened to be the MEU that was out there that got the call for stopping Gaddafi's, taking over Benghazi. And you never know when that's going to be you. And again, like I'm not saying, don't be, the best pilot or the best Marine or the best whatever your MOS is. Do everything that you can to be prepared, because there were certainly times throughout my time in Iraq in Afghanistan and on, Odyssey Dawn. No, I didn't see any combat in the F-35, but we did some pretty cool stuff. And there was always someone else that was, out there in the fleet that was better prepared, better schooled up to do it. But we just, you just never know when it's going to be your time. You're going to get called. And, by the time you get called, just based off of how dynamic things are in the world now, like you don't have time to prep.
Mm.
It's like the rifle range. Like your prep time is over. You don't have it. Like
Right.
your prep time was when you were, chilling on the beach or hanging out with your boys at the bar in Pacific Beach or whatever. And um, I mean that's it. I mean just be prepared and don't lose focus. I remember it was as I was getting ready to retire. Looking at my XO and I, who's just recently selected to command BMX-1, good buddy of mine. We're like talking, and it's like, dude, a lot of the generation of so he was a Hornet guy. He was on a FAC tour, and he got a Bronze Star in the Sangan Valley. A lot, like you said, a lot of the the kind of the warrior, quote unquote, warriors are gone. But I mean, really, like all of the Marines are trained to like ready. Like we are all warriors. Some just had the opportunity, like the time was theirs. Like that was the time that they got to go and execute what they had been trained to do. And I just would tell our young guys, like you never know. Like my Marines that we were with in the Iwakuni before I retired, we've got guys, that are out there now doing really cool stuff out of F-35s throughout the world in multiple theaters. There are guys that I was on the ground side with that are still doing incredible things. And like, I would always tell the squadron, when I was in command that, like the big one's coming. We just might not know what it is.
Mhm.
It might be China, it might be Iran, it might be some obscure country that we've never even heard of before. So, just be ready, like so that when you get called that you're ready to execute and you can do it violently.
Nice.
How do you
William.
specifically reflect upon your experiences in Libya? Because a lot of veterans interview are out in Afghanistan, and those have gone there, of course. And but how specifically do you reflect upon Libya?
I mean, obviously, I'm proud of what we did as a unit. I'm proud of I mean, that was all incredible, like what we got to do real time. I mean, it was sad to see, what happened in Benghazi, a few years later, 2 years later. That was very upsetting because it's almost like, when, I was in Afghanistan for 9 months on the C-130, the Harvest Hawk program, and we did a lot of really good work there. I mean, we were there for almost 2 full decades. And, a lot of Marines lost their lives. A lot of other coalition partners lost their lives fighting for something in Afghanistan, and we just gave it all away when we pulled out. So the emotions for Benghazi or for Libya aren't as strong as they are for Afghanistan, in the sense of we did a lot for presumably nothing. But I mean, again, at the tactical level, like as long as for me keeping it in that spotlight, like in that frame of that as pilots, we did our mission as maintainers. They kept the airplanes up. I mean, everyone that had a job to do on that boat did the job at the time. I mean, everybody. I mean, from our air traffic controllers to our airspace folks to our intel folks, Marines and Navy. I mean, everyone that had a mission to execute on that deployment during Odyssey Dawn, like, dude, it was like the Super Bowl, and everybody freaking knocked it out of the park. So, like, looking back, like, I don't really, my emotions don't hang on what happened after the fact. I just like at the time when we were called up to execute the mission, we did it. And everything else that happens after that within in the Pentagon or in politics, Congress or the White House, everything outside of that was like outside of my control. And if you are unhappy with how things have turned out, and 10 or 15 years or 30 years later you're still thinking about it, like you're gonna have a pretty miserable life, looking back. So you know do your job, execute the mission, and be proud that you did it.
Man.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Michael, man, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and taking the time to talk about this really unique and interesting time in Marine Corps history. So thank you for all you did. Thank you for all you're doing, man, and really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks, dude.
Yeah, no, it's great talking to you guys.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Lichman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.